I've just returned from yet another road trip in the 250 series 1958 trim Land Cruiser, now with just over 8,700 miles, and felt it was time to give you my thoughts about my ownership experience. Before we do anything else, I'll address something everybody is talking about with these, which is the 250 generation code. Yes, you can call it a Prado, and yes, you can call it a Land Cruiser. A friend of mine made a TikTok with my car adding a Prado badge to the back, and all the comments were trying to defend me by saying, "It's not a Prado," and then roasting my Omega Swatch, thinking he was wearing it, saying it's not a real Omega, so he can't talk about this not being a real Land Cruiser. Turns out I like the fake version of both. The fact of the matter is, this thing holds almost nothing in common with old Land Cruisers apart from the name. But if it still had a straight six and a solid front axle, it would still be as unpleasant to drive as an 80 series. Fight me. Additionally, it's way better looking than the current 4Runner, and unlike the 4Runner or even the Sequoia, I get the sense it was designed as a Lexus and then de-luxuried to Toyota spec instead of the other way around. With that nonsense out of the way, let's start front to back on the mechanics of it, and we can move into some of the specifics of things I've noticed that I either really like or things that could be improved. Before that, though, I would like to explain that I bought this Land Cruiser used with 900 miles, with the off-brand mud tires and puck lift already installed. Both of these will probably be replaced in the future, but it was good enough to get out the door without having to do any modifications right away. The blackout look isn't really for me, but wheels can easily be powder coated, which I will probably do, and change to silver once these tires need replacement. But enough about mine in particular, let's talk about the Prado as a whole. Starting at the front, the grille may be a bit gawping. It sticks out almost past the bumper, which is visually hard to make sense of. But it does have plenty of room behind it to mount a winch, which I'd like to do. There's a company in the aftermarket that's taken notice of this space, and I've already built a replacement for the center section of the bumper to accommodate a winch mount. I like this. Moving downward, the front suspension is pliable, and this puck lift allows 35s to be fitted, but seemingly at the cost of articulation. The front does not like to articulate off-road at all. The wobbling side to side is not confidence-inspiring, but it gets the job done. At this point, I would like to mention I had a 2015 Jeep JKU, which I loved and drove 60,000 miles. And the front solid axle did articulate nicely, particularly with the sway bar disconnected. But the ride quality between the two is incomparable. The independent front eliminates 90% of the bump steer I felt in the Jeep, and I have no fear of death wobble anymore. Back to the Land Cruiser. Once more suspension options become available, I'll probably look elsewhere than the puck lift to try and get some of that articulation back, but this will do for now. The all-wheel drive system is great in this. The center and rear locker controls are a bit clunky, as is the low range selection, but this is probably because I'm not used to a button for the transfer case. I need to read in the owner's manual about the right way to select and deselect these functions, but I've been able to fight them enough to make them work when I need them to. Moving upwards again, let's talk about the 4-cylinder. The fact that there is no plastic cover is something I like. It's cool to be able to see how complicated this whole hybrid system is. I just have no idea how it works. Pixies, I presume. People say that the engine is loud, but when there isn't much wind, it'll still quite happily sit above 80 miles an hour in 8th gear at 2,000 RPM. That's good enough for me on 35s, and I'm getting more than double the fuel economy I did with that Pentastar V6 on the same size tire at the same speeds. That said, I'm only getting between 12 and 15 miles per gallon on the highway, and about 14 to 16 in the city. In the Jeep, I got 6 to 8 miles per gallon everywhere, just awful. That was the same fuel economy I achieved in my 80 series, by the way. I will briefly say the transmission's been fine for me so far, though I know there have been some issues with them reported by others. Now, let's get to the rear of the car, where most of my issues are. The looks of it are great, but the hybrid battery is horribly placed. The useless spare tire, since 135s now, is taking up the space where the battery should be, and my dogs can hardly jump into the back because the trunk floor is so high. This is not the fairest comparison, but let's see how they get into our other road trip car, my wife's RX, and then let's see the process to get them into the Land Cruiser.
Here, dogs. Tara. Let's go. There's one. Come on, Jupiter. Alright. Look at that. There's one. I need your help with the next one because they won't be able to get in. Alright, come on, dogs. Here. Come on, Dora. Alright, come on. Come here. Come on, let's go. Get down. Alright, Opie, go up. Go up. You got it. Come here, Opie. Tara, come on. Tara, come here. Come on, get down. Come on. Good girl. Come here, Tara. Come on this way. Oh my god, she actually made it in. Dogs.
My dogs are hardly graceful, and I'm pretty sure if I bought a pet ramp, they would just fall off of it. Now, the first time we brought the Land Cruiser to Colorado, we took the dogs with us, and one of them got very sick in the back, which meant I got to remove the entire floor of the trunk down to the metal to power wash everything. And I was a little surprised that, apart from 2 bolts holding down anchors for child seats, everything in the trunk just clicks in. I would rather unbolt things than yank them out, but this is the way of modernity. As Reagan said, progress is a good thing, it's just gone on too long. In the trunk, the design for the third row and refusal to put one in has left some interesting quirks. The vent in the ceiling brings fresh air to the dogs, who are now barking, which will be great in the summer when a lot of heat comes in through the windows. The cup holders are a funny touch back there, but I'm sure eventually I'll find a use for them. The other big drawback to the hybrid battery location, though, is it produces heat which radiates up through the floor. I'm a little worried this will lead to some discomfort for the dogs on road trips in the summer. Now that we've addressed the hardware of the car, let's talk about some specifics. I'm going to start with a story I told on my way back up to Colorado this past weekend about a quirk I find odd, but sort of charming.
The single dumbest thing on this car that I've found is, I have this big black Land Cruiser, it's muy machismo and all that, and why did they fit the horn from a Corolla in this? It is just the silliest sounding thing I've ever heard. It does remind me of a funny story, though. When my now wife and I first started dating, we took a round the country road trip from Oklahoma to Colorado to Chicago to upstate New York and over to Boston, down to Virginia, over to Nashville, and back to Oklahoma City in 8 days in my Cayman. And we still liked each other at the end of it. But there was a period in Boston when I was driving along and I was so mad because I kept getting cut off and all that. And I didn't realize it at the time, but my horn had broken. And, I'm just she can tell I'm getting really frustrated. She's being very quiet. And I just lay on the horn with this fellow in front of me who cut me off. And my horn just went mee, because only the high horn was working, not the low one. That instantly cut all tension, and I still haven't fixed the horn because that was just so good. But that reminds me a little bit of this. You cannot use this horn in anger. You have to use it as an excuse me.
There are other aspects I like of this interior, and it's probably a good time to talk about why I opted for the Land Cruiser over the GX. I was actually at a Lexus dealership here in Oklahoma City looking at the GX when I saw my car for the first time. The price differential was pretty great between the Overtrail trim and this, especially considering I would have lifted the Overtrail anyway and incurred the same expenses the previous owner did with mine. This thing is cosplaying as a base model, though. It has cloth seats, but they're heated. The steering wheel is also heated. The screen still has Apple CarPlay and Android whatever, and the sound system is nice. All the surfaces passed the field test, and the seats are comfortable. Plus, I love the piano key arrangement of the climate control buttons. They remind me of an old Bonanza. When I contrasted this interior with the admittedly prettier GX interior, the screen was huge, there were no buttons for anything, and the leather seats weren't nice enough to justify being burned in the summer and frozen in the winter. Further, there are some dubious reliability stories with the big V6, and I didn't want to burn twice the fuel for the same power. If there's a company that's good at hybrids, it's Toyota, so I think this system will be able to last for a long time. Speaking of power, let's talk about towing. So far, I've towed my Volvo across town with a pretty heavy car hauler, and I've towed my little Airstream Bambi around. Even lifted, this Land Cruiser does a perfectly fine job at it. And that really is as much weight as I need to move around. The mirrors are pretty narrow, so it's hard to see around the Airstream, but the trailer brake system works great and is easy, and I feel relaxed while towing with this. It isn't an F-250, but it works for my purposes. Now, let's get to my favorite long-term thing, and two long-term things that annoy the hell out of me. I had a Volvo V90 for a while, and I loved the interior and the looks of it, but I got rid of it pretty quickly because of something that I just couldn't stand. You could turn all the nannies off, but once you turn the car off and on again, they're all back. With this, though, I turned off the lane keep assist and the other stuff when I bought the car, and they are still off. Wonderful. And now the two things that annoy me. The climate control doesn't work right. In my other two cars, which are from the mid-2000s, I have the climate control set at 69 all year, and all year the interior of my cars are 69 degrees. It's a nice temperature. But in the winter, I have to turn the AC all the way to low and occasionally bump it up to 63 degrees just to keep it from blowing molten hot air on me. And the auto function doesn't help at all. This is a real annoyance, and I'm still trying to figure out a better solution. But this pales in comparison to the biggest problem I have with the Land Cruiser, which is the thimble-sized gas tank. 15 gallons is not enough for such a big, heavy car with not great fuel economy. On the highway, I get up to 230 miles of range. In virtually every car I've driven from Oklahoma City to Colorado Springs, I've had to stop once. But in this, I have to stop at least twice to refuel. And yesterday, with all the headwinds I had coming back, I had to refuel 3 times. The fuel economy isn't amazing, but the range is really what matters to me. I can't wait for an extended tank to be offered. I will be their first customer. So overall, would I recommend it? Absolutely. I've basically lived in this thing for the past 2 months, and I've put 7,000 some odd miles on it, and I'm still completely entertained by it. It's a little hard to park in tight parking lots, and it's a little slow off the line, but it is an engaging and pleasant experience to drive. When we have kids, I know they'll be safe in the back, and it looks good. The little annoyances have more to do with modernity as a whole than they do this individual car, like the infotainment stuff not always automatically linking to your phone, but it is still a solidly built, somewhat luxurious, very spacious, hopefully 20-year product that I can enjoy for a long time. What else would you want? Go get one.